it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the first half of May. I'm going to be doing this as a book battle, so we're going to pair up each of the books and then battle them against each other until we come up with the champion for this first half of the month. Then at the end of the month, I'll battle them against the champion of that half of the month, and we'll work out who the best book. Who? A book's who's? Sort of. Anyway, I'm going to battle them against each other and come up with the ultimate champion of the month. Now, I did read 10 books this month, and a lot of them were ebooks and audiobooks because it's a little bit hard to get your hands on physical books at the moment since all the libraries are closed. I probably should be reading all the books off my physical TBR shelves, but I mean, I read one, so I sort of did. Anyway, let's get into the battle and start with round one. So for our first book battle, I'm going to be putting up two lock and key graphic novels that I read. Firstly, we have Dog Days and then also Heaven and Earth. Both of these are a collection of a couple of short stories set in the world of the Lock and Key graphic novel series, but not part of the main story. So the first one, Dog Days, is really just this cute little story where the kids of this family have used the beast key in order to turn their dog into a human boy. And they're just having this cute little conversation with this other boy who happens to be a dog. It's really cute, but kind of pointless and just not very much substance. That one did also have a little story about the family from the main story re-establishing the key house. Again, very short, not much substance. And there was also a little sample of another Joe Hill graphic novel, but I wasn't interested, so I didn't read it. The other one, Heaven and Earth, it did have a bit more substance, so there are 3 stories in this one. The first one is a story set in the time of some of the ancestors of the Locke family, where one of the sons has a brain tumor and they use the keys in order to help him find a better place and to get away from his pain, and it's just really lovely and beautiful. But it was really strange how much the transition from that story to the second story was very jarring, because the second one starts with these really violent criminals talking in a very awful way, killing people, going on a crime spree, and then they turn up at the key house hoping to use that as the port for their escape. But then the Lock and Key family, not the one from the main graphic novel series, but some of their ancestors, use the keys in order to bring these criminals down. And it was very bloody and violent, but I really enjoyed it. I thought, even though it was kind of brutal, it was a lot of fun, and I'm really hoping that we'll get more of that particular group of ancestors story in the future. And then the last short story in that group was one where the main Locke family find an outhouse that has a key hanging outside. It was a little bit silly and pointless again, but that's fine. I mean, so obviously I wouldn't recommend either of these unless you've read the main Lock and Key graphic novel and you really love it. I do really recommend that series. These are just like little fun things on the side. I got them from the library. I don't know if I could ever justify actually buying them unless they were super cheap, which I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be, or at least I wouldn't be able to get them for cheap here in New Zealand, especially at the moment. But as far as the battle goes, I would definitely put Heaven and Earth through to the next round because I just think the stories in that one had a bit more substance, or at least the first 2 did. Then the next battle is A Copper Gauntlet by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare up against A Sprinkle of Sorcery by Michele Harrison. Both of these are middle grade sequels, so the second books in their respective series. The Copper Gauntlet is the second book in the Magisterium series. I did really enjoy The Iron Trial, but I'm not sure I enjoyed the Copper Gauntlet quite as much. I do really like the way it's playing with the Chosen One trope and the idea that the Chosen One has this nemesis. In this story, the protagonist is afraid that he is the bad guy, and I really like that aspect of the story. But I do think that this particular book was a bit unstructured. This is a magic school book, so our main character, Callum, in the first book goes to magic school even though his father really didn't want him to. And there he discovers that maybe he has this connection to the bad guy that everyone's afraid of. In the second book we explore that further, but it spends a lot of the time outside of the magic school setting, and I think it would have been better if we'd gotten a bit more of that magic school and them learning how to use their magic. It just always feels a bit ridiculous when in their second year of magic these kids are going out and achieving things that adults in this magical world have never been able to do. But overall, it was still okay, so I do think I will continue the series. Then A Sprinkle of Sorcery follows these three sisters who in the first book, A Pinch of Magic, learnt that their family had these different magical items that they could use. In the second book, they run into this young girl who's on the run and they end up setting out to save her, and as well, the younger sister does get kidnapped, so they need to save her. I do think those two different plot lines were a bit confusing at some points because one of them got wrapped up halfway through the story and I'd actually kind of forgotten about the other part of the story, so then I had to like readjust my mind to get back into it for the second half. But overall, I thought it was a lot of fun. We've got Will-O-the-Wisps and pirates. It's not particularly realistic, but it's not really set up to be realistic. I do really like the way that the magical items work, and I'm looking forward to continuing this series as well, because it kind of seems like each book is focusing on a different magical item being used. So I believe the third item that they have, which would be for the third book, is a mirror that they can use for talking to people at a distance. Anyway, of these two books, it's kind of hard. I think A Sprinkle of Sorcery is a lot more fun, although the Copper Gauntlet is probably doing some more interesting things, but it did get confusing sometimes. I think if I had to put one forward to the next round, it would probably be A Sprinkle of Sorcery. Okay, so now we move on to round 2. Our first battle for this round is going to be Shiver by Junji Ito up against Heaven and Earth by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. So again, both of these are graphic novels. Shiver is a horror manga, and I've been reading a lot of Junji Ito lately and really loving it. It's very twisted and very dark and very creepy, and it's definitely not the kind of stuff that everyone is going to like. This particular one, I would say trigger warnings for suicide, particularly hanging. There's some really awful stuff that happens, so if you're at all sensitive, this probably isn't something you would like, but I really enjoy just seeing how weird and icky it is. And just every short story that you go into within this horror manga, you know that something weird is going to happen, so you're like trying to figure out what it's going to be, which I really enjoy. I would say that for the most part the art is pretty simple. There's just occasional pages where it's quite elaborate and amazing, so I wouldn't say the art is anything too amazing, but regardless, I do think it's very easy to follow along with what's going on, even though the things that are going on are very unexpected. So if I had to pick which one I would put through to the next round, I think both of these were like short story anthologies in a way, but there was just so much more to Shiver. It's a 392 page book versus like a very short little thing. There were just so many cool ideas in Shiver. I would definitely have to put Shiver through to the next round. So the next battle, I didn't manage to match things up as well as I have in some of the previous battles. We've got The Lady Astronaut of Mars by Mary Robinette Kowal up against Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. So The Lady Astronaut of Mars is a little short story, and it's a prequel to the Calculating Stars and the Lady Astronaut series, although the short story I believe was actually written first. It's not a prequel, it's set well after the events of the Calculating Stars. I'm explaining this badly, but in the Calculating Stars we have this woman becoming one of the first women astronauts in the 50s in an alternate kind of America. This one is set when this same woman is now 63 and she's trying to decide whether she should go on this final space mission or whether she should stay with her dying husband. In some ways this was a really hard book to read because the way that her husband's health issues are being explained, it was very realistic but very upsetting, but I do think it did a really good job of portraying what it would be like to be an older astronaut dealing with the situation. I also appreciated the part where this woman has decided not to have children, and she talks about that in quite a pragmatic way. I just thought this short story was really beautiful and heartbreaking and really well written. So putting that up against Scrappy Little Nobody, which is Anna Kendrick's autobiography, I did really enjoy the beginning where she was talking about her early life and how she got into acting. I didn't care so much about when she talked about going to awards shows and that aspect of fame. There was a weird bit kind of in the middle which seemed like filler, and then the ending was almost trying to be a self-help book, which wasn't what I was going into this book for at all, and it seemed a bit strange. So I think overall, I just think maybe you shouldn't really write an autobiography when you're still in the early part of your career. But no doubt somebody offered her a lot of money to do it, so that's why she did it. And fair enough, a lot of the time she is really fun and funny. She writes pretty well. Some of the time her jokes don't quite hit the mark and they seem like borderline problematic, but it's not always clear, like, is she joking about it in a self-aware way or not? Overall, I think if you're a really big Kendrick fan, then you would love this autobiography, but if you're not particularly, which I'm not particularly, then it was an okay read, but it's not amazing. So, unsurprisingly, I'm going to put The Lady Astronaut of Mars through to the next round. Next, we have Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb up against A Sprinkle of Sorcery by Michele Harrison. So Fool's Errand is the first book of the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third trilogy in the bigger realm of the Elderlings. In this trilogy, we go back to the characters from the first trilogy, and I was really glad to be back in the same world with the Fitz and the Fool, who I just really love. I will admit that the beginning was very slow paced, and if it wasn't for my love for those characters, I think I would have been bored, but I just wanted to hear about what Fitz was doing out living in the middle of nowhere and what he'd done to end up there. I was happy to see his wolf companion, Night Eyes, and I was also happy when he got pulled back into the court politics and searching for the Prince Dutiful who had gone missing. I really liked what Robin Hobb did in this particular book to explore the skill and the wit even further. So these are the two magic systems within this world. The skill is the ability that the royal line has in order to kind of do telepathy and read people's minds and influence people's ways of thinking. And the wit is this kind of taboo ability that some people have to form bonds with animals and talk to animals. And in this particular book, we have a group of those people with the wit trying to push back against some of the persecution against their people. Also, most importantly, we have a whole bunch of cats talking to Fitz throughout this book, which was probably my favorite part of the whole book. I just love hearing cats talk like cats. But the consequences of the skill and the wit were explored really well, and the way that had such an emotional impact on the story was really great. I love the way that this group of characters has a whole bunch of father and son dynamics that are so beautiful, and they break my heart all the time how beautiful they are. And even though this particular book did seem to completely wrap things up, there are 2 more books in the trilogy, so I'm interested to see what will happen next. I think it's probably not a surprise that compared to A Sprinkle of Sorcery, which is just a middle grade fantasy, how can it stand up against this epic fantasy that I absolutely loved? It can't, so Fool's Errand is through to the next round. Next we have The Cat Who Ate His Tail by Jacqueline Simon Gunn up against Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. So The Cat Who Ate His Tail is a book that I received for review. It is a story told from a cat's perspective, and that's why I was so excited to read it. And honestly, I really enjoyed it, even though in a lot of ways it's a contemporary about this woman's romance and her family issues and her friends and her health issues. So it doesn't sound like the thing that I would normally find that interesting, but somehow the cat's perspective was so well integrated that I really did enjoy it. I think because it is actually an autobiographical story, that made it feel a lot more real, and that's why it had such a broad range of different things that were brought into the story. Also, the author is actually a psychologist, and the cat would often talk about the things that their owner had written, which I kind of didn't really believe that the cat was able to read these things that their psychologist owner was writing up, but I guess that was just a justification to talk about some of these psychological principles, which for the most part I found very educational and informative, and I guess it just added a lot of positive lessons to the book. Occasionally it did feel a little bit preachy and took me out of the story, but for the most part I really enjoyed it. I will say though, The Cat Who Ate His Tail, I thought the title was going to be a metaphor, but it was not. Our cat struggles with abandonment issues and anxiety, and so things happen, and it was very intense. And I think you should go into that book expecting that. Because I do know that that is probably something some people would be quite sensitive to. Then the other book in this battle is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. This is another contemporary, so again, not something I usually read, but I was reading it for the Asian Readathon and also my TBR machine challenge, because this is the one that's off my physical TBR shelves. So this is the story where at the very beginning, I think it always helps just to read the first line. So the first line is, Lydia is dead, but they don't know this yet. So this is the story about a family where the older sister dies, and then it just tells you the story of her family dealing with that death, but also the events leading up to it. I will say I enjoyed the bits about the children in the family a lot more. The adults made some really bad decisions that to a large degree impacted what happened to the children, and it just made me really dislike the parents, and just a lot of the things they were doing were quite infuriating. This is another one that would come with trigger warnings for suicide. It's definitely a very upsetting book, not one to go into without being prepared. I definitely cried quite a lot. It was very emotionally engaging and I did really love it. The only real criticism I have for it is that sometimes within a small section it would skip between the perspective of different family members, and while I enjoyed that the overall story pulled in the perspectives of the different characters, I found it sometimes a bit confusing when it would switch too often within a small bit without any real indication that we were changing perspectives. Books sometimes do this and I personally never really like it, but I definitely would say if you want to have your heart broken, but also read about a book with very complex family dynamics, and there's also a large part of the story about how this is a mixed Chinese-American family living in a town where there are not any other Chinese people. So that's a strong theme within the book as well, and I just think it addresses so many issues in such a great way. So I will be putting Everything I Never Told You through to the next round. Okay, so now we're on to the semi-finals. So firstly, we've got Shiver by Junji Ito up against The Lady Astronaut of Mars. The semi-finals is where things get difficult because I really loved both of those, and it really doesn't seem fair to compare a 392-page book against a very short story. So while Shiver was a lot of real creepy fun and I really enjoyed it, I do think The Lady Astronaut of Mars was a much more meaningful story, and I always really like stories from older characters because I feel like those aren't as common. So I think I would put The Lady Astronaut of Mars through to the next round. And then we have Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb up against Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. Very hard to compare these books. Both of them made me cry quite a lot. Both of them deal with kind of these family dynamics in a way, although the family in Fool's Errand is much more complex. It's always really hard to compare books that are completely different genres, and I think I would definitely recommend both these books to people if they sound interesting to you. And obviously you can't read Fool's Errand unless you've read all the books from the realm of the Elderlings before that, but I just think Robin Hobb did such amazing things exploring her world even further in Fool's Errand that I am going to put Fool's Errand through to the next round. And that means we're up to the finals. So the finals will be The Lady Astronaut of Mars by Mary Robinette Kowal up against Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. And again, this is one where we're comparing a really short little story against a massive tome. I don't even know how long Fool's Errand was, because I listened to the audiobook. According to Goodreads, the mass market paperback is 661 pages. So I'm comparing a 661 page book against something that was like 30 pages. Obviously, Fool's Errand had a much larger emotional impact on me. I also think like what I like about The Lady Astronaut of Mars is how it's exploring what it's like to get older. But to some degree, Fool's Errand is doing that as well, because in the first trilogy, Fitz is very young, but in this second trilogy, he's more like middle-aged, I think. He's become a bit of a father figure. So he's not as old as the character in The Lady Astronaut of Mars, but he is older, and also the man that trained him to be an assassin is very old. So in some ways it is looking at what it's like to get older, but it's also then talking about your perspective of the younger generation and the troubles that they can cause you. I guess actually, while I'm thinking about it, definitely trigger warnings in this whole series for animal deaths. They're never like gratuitous or like unnecessary. Animal death is always unnecessary. Wouldn't it be better if no one ever died, especially cute animals? So there's animal death in this. It's pretty much unavoidable in the way that the story is set up. So that's something to be careful of in this series. I don't know, I feel like I'm trying to argue that the Lady Astronaut of Mars can still compete against Fool's Errand, but I can't. Fool's Errand is definitely the winner for this first half of the month. I just loved it so much. And I definitely recommend the audiobook if you're a bit intimidated by the size of the books in this series. And the size of the series in general, really. Because I don't think I'm even halfway through the series yet. It makes me happy that I've got so much still to read though. So do let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about today, and if so, what you thought about them. I'd love to talk with you about it down in the comments. I'd also like to know how early you guessed which one was going to be the winner for this first half of the month. In the second half of the month, I do have a few other epic fantasies lined up that I think possibly might be able to compete against Fool's Errand when we get there. I guess we will see. But thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.